Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiborg. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something really central happening right now, the 80th UN General Assembly, which is actually kicking off this week. And tied into that, this surging international momentum we're seeing for recognizing Palestinian statehood. Our sources are saying it's a critical moment. Old illusions are kind of being stripped away, and it's revealing some immense challenges, but maybe also some opportunities for, well, reshaping global governance.
That's right. And we've pulled together quite a stack of sources for this one. We've got reports from Al Jazeera, some analysis from the Atlantic Council, official UN news, and detailed international legal documents, too. So the idea is to really cut through the noise, give you the core insights, help you understand the financial and political crises facing the UN, these growing calls for Palestinian recognition, and the, let's say, intricate legal battles playing out internationally.
Absolutely. We want to give you a clear picture of what's happening, why it matters for international relations, maybe even for Danish politics, and what could come next. We'll be looking closely at the diplomatic shifts, the legal stuff happening at the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice.
Big difference there. We'll get into that.
Right, and the human rights situation on the ground, too. Before we get into all that, just a quick note. You can subscribe to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiborg on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's a small monthly fee, and your support really helps us keep doing these deep dives. Plus, you get access to exclusive extra episodes. The link's right there in the description. Okay, let's unpack this. The 80th UN General Assembly, a moment of reckoning. So the 80th UNGA, it's happening now in New York. Can you kind of set the scene for us? What's the feeling? The key dates?
Well, the mood, according to our sources, is really one of reckoning. That's the word being used. There's internal hand-wringing, overfunding is sustainable. And this sort of ossified outrage over the war in Gaza, it feels like a moment of real introspection for the UN itself. The incoming president, former German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, she's presenting her agenda this Tuesday. Her term runs through September 2026, and the theme is, well, quite fitting. Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights.
Okay, so reckoning. And beyond Baerbock laying out her agenda, when does the main action start with all the world leaders?
The first week is mostly procedural stuff, but the big high-level week, that kicks off September 22nd. That starts with a meeting looking back at the UN's 80 years and also looking forward, considering the path ahead for a more inclusive and responsive multilateral system. Then the general debate follows on September 23rd. That's when you get the big speeches. At least 188 heads of state or high-ranking officials are expected, always a key moment.
Right. And for anyone maybe less familiar, remind us, what exactly does the UNGA do? Why is this gathering so important in the grand scheme of things?
Good question. The UNGA is basically the UN's main policy-making body. Think of it like a global parliament almost. It's unique because all 193 member countries get a seat, an equal voice. Palestine and the Holy See have observer status, non-member observer status. It tackles everything, really. International peace and security, especially if the Security Council is deadlocked, which happens. Also human rights, international law, cooperation on economic, social, health issues, you name it. And critically, it approves the UN budget and funds peacekeeping. So it holds the purse strings, in a way.
Okay, purse strings and policy. But you mentioned reckoning, and our sources definitely point to the UN being under, well, huge pressure right now, these huge crises. What are they exactly?
Richard Gowan from the International Crisis Group puts it quite starkly. He says, illusions have been rather stripped away. He points to major financial and political crises. For instance, the U.S., under President Trump, has, again, made widespread cuts to foreign aid, hundreds of millions to UN agencies.
Wow. Hundreds of millions.
Yes. And on top of that, they've withheld or even revoked visas for Palestinian Authority and PLO officials trying to attend the UNGA. Now, the U.S. is still the biggest funder, about $13 billion in 2023. But these caps create, in Gowan's words, an incredibly bad financial situation.
Right.
And then there are internal issues, too. Questions about Secretary General Guterres' UN80 initiative to streamline things. Some member states, even staff, are pushing back, so pressure from outside and inside. 2. The shifting landscape of Palestinian statehood recognition.
So you've got a UN dealing with its own internal storms, financial pressures, but against that backdrop, this huge external issue, Palestinian statehood, it seems to be really dominating the agenda this year. Sources are showing real momentum. What's the current status? How's this recognition landscape changing?
Well, right now, 147 out of 193 UN members recognize the state of Palestine. That's, what, over 76%?
Yeah.
And Palestine has had non-member observer status at the UNGA since back in November 2012. but getting full UN membership, that's been consistently blocked by the U.S. using or threatening to use its veto in the Security Council.
Okay, so observer status, but not full membership because of the U.S. veto. But this year feels different. What's driving this diplomatic surge we're seeing now?
A couple of major factors: the ongoing war and the terrible humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That's undeniable. But also, domestic political considerations within various countries are playing a big role. For example, France and Saudi Arabia are planning to host a conference on Israel and Palestine, and several European nations are signaling they'll join the recognition push. It feels like an acceleration.
Right, an acceleration. But we're seeing a lot of conditional recognition pledges, aren't we? So countries like Australia, Canada, the UK, they're saying, yes, but.
Yeah.
What's the story there? Is it a real shift or more like cautious hedging?
That's a really sharp observation. It does highlight the complexity. It's a shift, yes, but the conditions suggest countries want to influence the form of a future Palestinian state. It's not a blank check. Belgium just pledged recognition at the UNGA. France and Malta did earlier. But then you have Australia, Canada, the UK announcing conditional recognition.
Okay, so what are some of those conditions?
Let's break it down. France. Macron's pledge seemed to catch some off guard. It seems driven by domestic politics and this joint proposal with Saudi Arabia for a resolution. That resolution talks about tangible, time-bound, and irreversible steps towards two states. But, critically, it excludes Hamas and calls for Israeli withdrawal.
Okay, excluding Hamas is key there. What about Canada?
Canada. Prime Minister Carney announced recognition for September. Again, domestic pressure and national values cited. But it's conditional on the Palestinian Authority holding elections by next year, also excluding Hamas, and pursuing demilitarization. Canada is also offering money to the PA for governance reforms. So, strings attached.
And the UK, similar conditions.
United Kingdom. Prime Minister Starmer said the UK would recognize in September unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire, takes steps on Gaza, commits to two states, and says clearly it won't annex the West Bank. Very direct demands on Israel there.
And Germany, still holding back.
Germany. Foreign Minister Wadeful is sticking to the line that recognition should come at the end of a two-state process. But he adds the process needs to start at once. It's a slightly different nuance.
It's fascinating how varied the approaches are, even among allies. Now, thinking about our listeners interested in Danish politics. Denmark often emphasizes negotiated solutions or EU coordination. How does their stance fit into this picture? Does it show a split in the EU?
That's a great point about Denmark's traditional stance. Our sources indicate Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen initially preferred recognition to come either from a negotiated deal or a coordinated EU move, maybe around July 2025. That reflects that typical Danish and often broader Nordic emphasis on process and consensus. However, then in August 2025, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen announced Denmark would not recognize Palestine right now. Her reasoning was that it wouldn't actually help the children suffering on the ground at this moment.
So, a more pragmatic, humanitarian-focused justification for holding back.
Exactly. It highlights that even within the EU, while the long-term goal might be similar, the immediate tactics and priorities can differ. Denmark's prioritizing immediate needs and the conditions for a sustainable peace process over the symbolic act of recognition right now. It shows the nuances.
Okay, so with all these varied positions, conditional recognitions, how's the U.S. under President Trump reacting to this wave?
Well, President Trump seems to align with Israel's perspective. He said something like, you could make the case that you're rewarding Hamas if you do that. He clearly believes these recognitions won't achieve anything real on the ground, that only negotiations can do that.
But are the sources suggesting there's more to it?
Yes. Crucially, our sources point out that this wave of recognition is also a direct consequence of Israel's own failure to present any kind of believable day-after plan for Gaza. This contrasts with what previous U.S. administrations tried to push for. Even Trump's own idea for a Gaza Riviera went nowhere. And you have some extremist ministers in the Israeli government who seem to be openly pushing for reoccupation and annexation, which obviously undermines any path to negotiation and puts the U.S. in a difficult spot. 3, international legal framework and accountability.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Beyond the diplomacy, there's this really significant legal dimension unfolding. We hear about the ICC and the ICJ. What role are these international courts playing? And remind us, what's the basic difference between them again?
Right, it's crucial to keep them straight. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, prosecutes individuals. Think specific people accused of the gravest crimes. Genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. It's about Individual accountability.
Okay, individuals. And the ICJ.
The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is different. It's a UN body. It handles disputes between states, and it gives advisory opinions on legal questions asked by UN organs. So ICC for people, ICJ for states.
Got it. So how has Palestine actually engaged with these courts? Has that 2012 observer status made a difference?
A huge difference. That non-member observer status allowed Palestine to join international treaties and UN agencies. And critically, it opened the door to potentially invoking ICC jurisdiction. Palestine actually tried back in 2009 lodging a declaration to accept ICC jurisdiction. It was rejected initially, but the ICC prosecutor later said they'd revisit it if Palestine passes over that hurdle of statehood, which arguably it did with the observer status in 2012. So what that means is the ICC could investigate crimes committed after Palestine submits a fresh declaration, potentially going back quite far, even to July 2002, based on how these things have worked before.
Okay, so the ICC door is potentially open, but the ICJ, the state court, seems incredibly active right now. Can you walk us through some of the key rulings or opinions coming out of there?
Absolutely. The ICJ has been front and center lately. It really underscores the gravity of the situation under international law. Back in 2004, people might remember, the ICJ issued a big advisory opinion. The General Assembly asked for it. The court ruled Israel's building of the wall in occupied Palestinian territory was illegal.
Right, the wall, that was significant. What about more recently?
Much more recently. In January 2024, South Africa brought a case arguing violations of the Genocide Convention. The ICJ acknowledged a real and imminent risk of irreparable prejudice to Palestinians in Gaza. It ordered Israel to take measures to prevent genocidal acts.
And did that have an effect?
Well, the court issued further orders in March, noting the humanitarian situation was getting worse. Then in May, citing an exceptionally grave risk in Rafah, it ordered Israel to immediately stop its military offensive there. But, and this is a big but, our sources state these orders have been largely disregarded by Israel and most other states. That raises serious questions about enforcement, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Disregarded orders. Anything else from the ICJ?
Yes, perhaps the most significant recently. On July 19, 2024, the ICJ issued another advisory opinion. This one was about the legal consequences of Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, the OPT. The court found that the occupation, especially what it called its settler colonial character, effectively amounts to an act of aggression.
An act of aggression. That's strong language from the ICJ.
Very strong. The court stressed the need for a swift end to the occupation, dismantling settlements, evacuating settlers, really profound legal statements about the entire structure of the occupation.
Wow. Okay, so the ICJ is making these major pronouncements. But beyond the courts, UN human rights bodies are also issuing reports. What are they finding? What's the picture they're painting?
It's a deeply disturbing picture. The Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, she talks about ongoing horrors. She describes the violence since October 7, 2023, as part of a, quote, long-term, intentional Israeli strategy of forced displacement and replacement of Palestinians. And she goes further, suggesting that genocide should be perceived as a fundamental component and tool in the pursuit of complete Israeli colonization. It's an extraordinarily grave assessment from an independent UN expert.
That is incredibly serious. Genocide is a tool. What specific violations are being reported to lead to conclusions like that?
Well, there's the Independent International Commission of Inquiry, the ICI, on the OPT and Israel. Their March 2025 report details, quote, systematic use of sexual, reproductive, and other forms of gender-based violence, SRGBV. They report this being carried out by Israeli security forces and settlers. It includes deliberate attacks on healthcare facilities, denying access to reproductive services, and using starvation and deprivation as methods of warfare, which they say has led to increased miscarriages and maternal deaths. The Commission concludes these aren't isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern aimed at inflicting collective punishment and long-term harm, and again, quote, may amount to genocidal acts.
It's just horrific detail. And what about the physical landscape, the settlements? We know that's been a core issue for decades. What's the latest there?
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights' 2025 report details the continuing annexation of the Palestinian territories by settler expansion. It notes 49 new illegal outposts established just during the reporting period. This involves taking land, organized violence against Palestinians, and the unlawful transfer of its civilian population into occupied territory, moving settlers in.
And the scale of this?
The numbers are stark. 7,500 dunams of land appropriated for Israeli interests, 214 Palestinian structures demolished, displacing nearly 4,500 people. That demolition figure is up 194%.
194% increase.
Yes. And settler violence has intensified too, over 1,400 reported incidents, often happening with impunity. And sometimes the report says violence is even abetted by the authorities. It paints a picture of accelerating state-linked territorial expansion and violence.
Given these incredibly serious findings, aggression, potential genocide, systematic violence, annexation, what are these international bodies actually recommending? What should states do?
The recommendations are forceful, reflecting the gravity of the findings. First, they say states have a legal duty to prevent breaches of the Genocide Convention. That includes imposing a full arms embargo and sanctions on Israel.
A full arms embargo and sanctions? That's major.
It is. There's also a call to formally recognize Israel as an apartheid state and a persistent violator of international law. They even suggest considering suspending Israel's UN membership under Article 6 of the UN Charter.
Suspension from the UN.
That's on the table in these recommendations. Also, investigating and prosecuting companies and individuals with dual citizenship who might be involved in crimes. Ensuring unhindered humanitarian aid to Gaza, fully funding and protecting UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, are immediate priorities. And a direct call to the ICC prosecutor to investigate these alleged crimes. The Special Rapporteur Albanese sums it up starkly. The state of Israel, she concludes, is predicated on Palestinian erasure.
This really circles back to the question of state responsibility, especially for something as grave as genocide. How does international law view that? Can a state itself be held responsible?
Yes, and this is a critical legal point. State responsibility for genocide can be established even if no specific individual has been convicted of the crime. The key is whether the overall pattern of conduct by the state could only point to the existence of such intent.
So the pattern of actions matters more than pinning it on one person.
Exactly. Things like the failure of state bodies to stop violence, creating an atmosphere of impunity, those are relevant factors. Our sources suggest that the continuation of genocidal violence and incitement, even after the ICJ issued orders against it, combined with actions by various Israeli state bodies, are seen as demonstrating the state's intent. So yes, the state itself can bear responsibility. It's a powerful concept in international law. 4. Implications and future outlook.
Okay, so let's pull back and look at the bigger picture. We have these internal UN crises, the push for Palestinian statehood, these massive legal challenges. What does it all mean for the future? For international relations, for the UN itself?
Well, the UN is definitely facing some hard questions about its own effectiveness, its future. Richard Gowan, whom we mentioned earlier, notes that because of these U.S. visa restrictions, there are actual rumblings of lower attendance at UNGA. And it's sparking conversations about whether major global meetings should even stay in New York, or maybe shift to other UN hubs like Geneva, Vienna, or Nairobi. It could be eroding New York's centrality.
Interesting. But could these crises also create openings, opportunities for other countries, maybe from the global south, to step up or reshape the system?
That's exactly what some analysts are suggesting. O'Malley from Erasmus University points out that many global south nations think Brazil, India, South Africa, Indonesia don't just see this as a crisis. They see it as an opportunity to remake the system of global governance to suit their ends more precisely.
Remake the system.
Well, it's given new energy to those long-standing calls for reform, like expanding the permanent membership of the UN Security Council, though, there's still no clear path for how to do that. Right. Countries like China, for example, have been seeking more influence for years, partly through funding peacekeeping. This moment might accelerate those shifts in influence. It really does feel like a potential turning point, doesn't it, where crisis might force change.
It really does. Thinking historically, the UNGA stage has seen some incredibly dramatic moments. Hugo Chavez, Gaddafi, even Donald Trump himself. Does this year's assembly feel like it follows that kind of history-making precedent? What might it signal?
You're right. There's a history of theatrical, impactful moments. Trump's 2017 speech threatening to totally destroy North Korea apparently met with chortles in the hall, according to one source. The tone this year might be different, maybe more cautious, with leaders perhaps flattering the mercurial U.S. leader, as one source puts it, given the political climate. But the substance, the deep crises we've discussed, the huge shifts around Palestine recognition, could absolutely make this a pivotal year. It might even be, as Gallant suggests, a kind of swan song for the tradition of the UNGA always kicking off in the U.S., especially if these visa issues persist. It definitely signals a moment where the world might be reconsidering where the real center of global diplomacy actually lies.
It's certainly a period of intense flux, significant tension, and potentially profound change on the world stage. Well, that was quite the deep dive into the 80th UN General Assembly and these really significant shifts around Palestinian recognition. We've seen how global events, national interests, those complex international legal frameworks, they're all converging right now. It's shaping our world in real time.
Absolutely. It really throws into sharp relief the huge challenges in finding lasting peace, but also these persistent, growing calls for accountability under international law. And it raises profound questions about the UN's own role and future as it faces these, well, almost existential challenges.
As we've talked about, the path forward, whether for a two-state solution or for the UN itself, seems full of obstacles, but maybe opportunities too. It demands critical thinking from all of us. So the question we leave you with, our listener, is this. How do you see this balance of power shifting in international diplomacy as these events play out? And what role should international law really have in trying to shape a more just future? We really hope you found this deep dive valuable today. If you enjoyed the discussion, please do remember to follow Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiborg on your podcast platform and rating us 5 stars. That really helps us reach more people and keep these important conversations going. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to our next deep dive.